Good afternoon, everyone. It's a little dreary and rainy outside, but I'm so glad you all could be with us today. I'm Jocelyn Kennedy. I'm the Executive Director of the Harvard Law School Library. It's my pleasure to welcome you here to one of our book talks. Before I start, I need to thank the Dean for providing lunch, so thank you, Dean Manning. Please continue to enjoy your lunch during the presentation. I also want to let you know that copies of today's book are available outside of the room if you'd like to purchase one after the talk. And I'm also here to let you know that today's talk is being recorded. It will be broadcast on the law school's YouTube channel, probably early next week, so anything you say is being recorded. So now down to business. It's my pleasure to introduce the author of Butterfly Politics, Catharine MacKinnon, who is the James Barr Ames Visiting Professor of Law here at Harvard and the Elizabeth Long Professor of Law at the University of Michigan. Professor MacKinnon is an internationally known legal scholar and practitioner working in the area of sex equality, which spans civil, criminal, and constitutional law in both domestic, international, and comparative forums. From 2008 to 2012, Professor MacKinnon served as the first special gender advisor to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court and has published a dozen books, including Sexual Harassment of Working Women, Feminism Unmodified, Women's Lives, Men's Laws, and her casebook, which many of you probably have, Sex Equality. She's written countless articles in journals and the popular press. She works regularly with Equality Now, an NGO promoting international sex equality rights for women, and the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women, and was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award by the Association of American Law Schools Women's Division in 2014. And just as a personal note, I used to work at the University of Michigan and had the great pleasure of doing a lot of research for Professor MacKinnon in her sort of bottomless pit of article writing and books, which was a great pleasure, and so I hope you enjoy today's talk.
It is great to finally meet the amazing Jocelyn Kennedy, who is actually acknowledged in any number of my bottomless articles. And there was a certain point at which I was confidentially informed that this is before digital, the University of Michigan Law Library put in a special fax line just for me. So that my request for research, et cetera, would, I was shocked by this. I tried to restrain myself after that. So I'm going to talk for a while, and then I'm going to hear from you. And we will interact about these ideas and these realities. In law, as alluded to by Jocelyn Kennedy, I've done a lot of theory, and I've also done a lot of practice. But what I haven't done before this book is theorize my practice. That is what this collection, Butterfly Politics, is an attempt to do. That is to conceptualize 40 years of plus of intervening for social equality through law, where it's gone, where it is, where it could go, focusing on strategic challenges specifically to gender hierarchy in all of its manifestations, which necessarily include specifically race and class, in an attempt to change the realities, in particular, of sexual abuse on the ground. I mean, that's been its target all this time. So among the things I've learned is that changing the power structure involved, and that is, in my work, shifting the politics of male dominance. That's what it's been about. Focusing on sexual harassment, on rape, in and out of genocide, on pornography, prostitution, and sex trafficking. Shifting the politics of male dominance in all of these forms of sexual abuse is a collective project. It is not an individual one. It takes a movement. We actually may finally be having that movement. It's deeply contextual and grounded. It springs from the realities of social life, in particular, the intensified vulnerabilities experienced by a lot of people who are particularly targeted for sexual abuse, which includes people with disabilities, includes younger people and older people, people who are targeted based on their caste, where caste exists, as well as class and ethnicity every place. It springs from the reality of the vulnerabilities of those qualities in social life and relationships. It doesn't come from anybody's head. Or another way of putting this is that somebody's head comes from all of those. You know, it's a material project. It's also totally contingent. Nothing about it is inevitable, as some people on the left would keep telling us, or actually impossible to change, as a lot of people on the right imagine, or I think maybe they hope. That is, it actually does matter what you do. This is the big miracle I've discovered in all of this. I mean, I'm not anybody, and managed to do quite a bit, so I'll be talking about those things in light of having learned that it actually matters what you do. And I have also learned that everything is content-based, meaning it is substantive, it isn't abstract. You get taught often a lot of abstractions in law school, but whether something actually changes in the world turns on the right substantive intervention. You really have to know what is substantively going on, not abstractly going on, however small that intervention is. So how to think about the right intervention is the task I gave myself with this, because people have been asking me for years and years, how do you do what you do? How did you make that case do this, et cetera? And so this is my attempt to articulate that through the image of the butterfly effect. In 1972, when the scientist Konrad Lorenz asked, does the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil set off a tornado in Texas? He answered yes, coining the butterfly effect, which charmingly models how some extremely small, simple actions, properly targeted in the right context, can come to have highly complex, large, even cataclysmic consequences worlds away in certain contexts. This is according to chaos theory's understanding of complex causality in dynamic, unstable systems, which has for a long time sounded a lot like law to me. He did it mathematically, I don't. Somebody could, maybe, at some point. But say weather, for example, yeah, is predicted a lot more accurately today as a result of the application of chaos theory. And when they give you those models that show you, well, this thing could go here, here, or it could just bounce off us and go that way, these are feeding into the model several of chaos theory's possibilities. This is not a set of regressions. You know, it really is using chaos theory with a set of different inputs. If the heat is just this way, it'll be like that. And if it stays hot, it'll be more like this. You see, that's one instance of it. So what I'm calling butterfly politics metaphorically means that the right small intervention in an unstable political system can ultimately produce large, complex reverberations leading to transformations systemically, changes. And actually, given that male dominance has been regarded as being as inevitable as weather, and given that actually we've changed the weather more than we've changed male dominance, I think there's a certain symmetry in all this. So butterfly politics is an attempt to understand how strategic intervention can produce systemic transformation in the gender system. And this metaphor highlights some crucial dimensions of legal political activism, including the domain of the action, the strategic choice of moments of initiation, the dynamics of the intervention, including blowback, of which there is plenty, the collaborative effects of collective repetition. I mean, this is how it works. There may be a butterfly initially, but the way it works is a collective effect in which many butterflies then commence to move in collective ways. The simultaneity also, this is another feature of it, and that's the simultaneity of retrospective and prospective causality. That is to say, there is no linear time in this. Time goes forward and backward more or less simultaneously. So this butterfly effect notion metaphorically organizes activist advocacy in this collection. Much of it, the collection actually gives you the first time an idea that is now pretty familiar showed its face in public. I call this its butterfly moment. The small perturbation, the first time anybody ever even heard this phrase, or the first time anybody tried to do this particular thing, the consequences of which have turned out to be variously large. So, as to the nature of the domain, any social system, I mean, if there is any social system that is complex and unstable, I would say it would be sex inequality. And it's complex, among a lot of other reasons, because of its simultaneous multiple interacting variables, which prominently include race, ethnicity, caste, class, religion, disability, sexuality, age, and gender. All of those do a lot of their work through gender in this system. And it analyzes men as well as women. Newsflash to some people in the world out there, men have a gender as well as women. Now that's kind of like a lot of people, wouldn't you say? And also people who identify as neither, both, none of the above, have gender either identifications or disidentifications. In other words, this is about pretty much everybody, which makes it complex. So it's intrinsically unstable, I think, for a lot of reasons, but not the least of which is that it's predicated in its fundamentals on the lie of women's natural inferiority to men, men's natural superiority to women, termed difference in ideology, in often legal parlance and common parlance. Now, life, given half a chance, refutes women's inferiority every day, which means that it takes a lot of force to hold it together. It also means, I guess, given the status of women, that it hasn't been given half a chance to refute this idea. But this system for structuring and distributing power, that is this hierarchy of status and power, makes this a political system. Political meaning simply power-structured relationships. So in the face of a lot of evidence and contesting of its false basis and even some acknowledgement of its injustice and equality laws all over the place, it has proven extraordinarily tenacious, stable, always changing ground. You know, this is its main genius. You deal with, you know, it always moving its goalposts. You change one ground, you live up to one set of standards, it moves it, it changes it. This is its brilliance, okay, as a system. It also changes and adapts and climbs up all over and in and through all cultural constructs. So it's different in different cultures, yet the same because it's still there in its hierarchical forms. So accurately, I mean, for this whole thing to work, you have to accurately identify the social content of the system into which the legal intervention is contemplated. This is really crucial. Like, what's the equivalent to the air that the butterfly moves when it flexes its wings? In identifying this domain, a lot of work for sex equality, I think, has largely failed. Or actually, it has addressed mainly its symptoms, which do need addressing, but it hasn't gone to its roots. The conventional approaches, this sameness-difference idea, usually don't face the key dynamic of inequality, which is hierarchy, domination and subordination, an interactive symbiotic dynamic, a top-down, bottom-up, always in motion set of moves. It's not just a two-cell table where you simply locate yourself somewhere in it. That is, sexism is the hierarchy of men over women and of some over some other men. In fact, kind of a lot of other men. In societies of white supremacy, like ours, over men of color, in almost all societies of men who are deemed heterosexual, over men who identify as gay, just as a couple of examples. Conventional approaches to gender and gender inequality haven't addressed the key lived site to the operation of male dominance, in my opinion, which is sexuality. Legal strategies that prefer to contend with anything else, dynamics that are not what is driving the thing, on a terrain that is not where they are principally being driven, because that produces less opposition, or you may win today, or is more pleasant for activism and people aren't as vicious on the other side toward you, can do some things, but it can't fundamentally alter those dynamics, especially when they are as entrenched structurally as these are. You know, weather models wouldn't work either if people just didn't like thinking about the fact that it was getting warmer over time. So dominant approaches to inequality have misdiagnosed the nature of this system, including the way that it treats the social status quo baseline, that is, the way things are, as natural, and prominently embraces the gaslighting of survivors of sexual abuse. And while this goes on, while all that has gone on in the mainstream litigation of sex inequality, some kind of substantial changes in sex inequality through law have occurred kind of over to the side through unconventional and unprecedented approaches and arguments with no institutional backing, that is in particular by me. I have to put this. The legal claim for sexual harassment initiated in the United States is now worldwide, with the full theory of substantive equality pretty deeply embedded in it and growing out of it, showing this dynamic in high relief. And again, now we're starting to see this in the Me Too movement. The substantive equality idea in particular, the first butterfly moment of which is captured in this book, has been accepted as such by the Supreme Court of Canada and is also moving worldwide. And it is based not on sameness and difference and saying people who want to be equal have to be the same as people who are dominant to them and have had opportunities that they've been precluded from having. Rather, it's based on promoting the equality of substantively, historically disadvantaged groups. So why has this thing worked as well as it has? And I'm just thinking of sexual harassment law for the moment. Has it produced actual social change? I think that sexual harassment law strongly illustrates chaos theory's central notion of sensitivity to initial conditions. This is often called sensitive dependence for systems of nonlinear, non-mechanical dynamics. The law, in other words, is not a machine. And even the smallest shift in conditions at the outset, such as the facts of particular cases, certainly the choice of doctrine. Are we going to call this thing privacy? Are we going to call this thing speech or an exception to speech? Are we going to call this thing just a crime? Or are we going to call it what it is, which is a crime, a gender crime, a crime of gender inequality, and put inequality law in it? So certainly choice of doctrine can eventuate in dramatic changes over the long term. Because it's neither linear nor mechanical, I actually think that the common law, bless it, can be a promising sphere of application for this model of complex repetition, complex recursion, through its embrace of changing realities. It's one of the few places in law, you know, where that actually tells you things change, and we get to change with it. The law does, that is. Embrace of changing realities, and yet the way precedent actually has significance. That is, a single breakthrough that is iterated through many variations, which is exactly what's happened with sexual harassment law. Not one legislated to begin with. It was litigated. So it's concrete, it's got real people in it, it's got a whole set of facts, then another set, then another set, then another set. Iterated through many variations, can open a complex tide in a distinctive direction, also known as, I suppose, the dreaded floodgates. Even as the precedential system resists the initial breakthrough for lack of precedent. But for agents of social change who are acting consciously, knowing that extremely small initial conditions can be amplified exponentially over time through systemic repetition, ultimately to radically shift the way a system behaves. Now that's the risk, that is the caution, actually, and it's also the hope. So the takeaway with this is that setting things up right from the beginning is crucial. Sexual harassment as a legal claim for sex discrimination faced the fact that the domain is sexual. And that means that it is unequally gender-based, which had never been done. Because that actually is what the behavior is. It is not a personal individual tort that the system might have much more easily digested, but it would not have worked well for individuals because they would have all been cut off from each other going forward. It wouldn't have worked as it has, hence for social change as it has, because that isn't what it is. It really actually is gender-based, so when the problem is located legally in the domain in which the problem lives socially, it means that the legal claims will repeatedly succeed because their evidence will support the legal theory. Now, this is not hard. It's thus amazing how frequently it isn't done. And sure enough, you know, over legal and political ups and downs across cultures, the basic paradigm of sexual harassment law as sex discrimination, sometimes combined with other concepts, as, say, in France, in Israel especially, has held, changing to some extent society and politics as well as law, opening courts to survivors, and defining it, most importantly, I think, defining it as not just something you have to live through, not just life. And the outcome then has the possibility, because it got that piece right, of extending to other issues, as this one has, from women to men. That was our first move. Then to gay and lesbian rights, not only within the sexual harassment law, but to gay and lesbian rights as such. This is beginning to happen. A whole ton of those sites that are seeing gay and lesbian rights as sex discrimination are sexual harassment cases. It makes total sense. And also along the substantive equality route to transgender rights as well. And this is all because that one wing flap at the outset selected the accurate domain. So it's necessary to access this dynamic, to call problems in law what they are in life. Rape as torture became established in international law at warp speed, you know, based on something that's in this book in exactly the same way. Another instance is the international definition of rape in the Akayesu case, which is discussed in part in here, but it's predicated on coercion, consent being so irrelevant to it that it isn't even mentioned. That is, rape is defined internationally in the Akayesu case as a physical invasion of a sexual nature under circumstances which are coercive. Now, if you have coercive circumstances, you don't need, in addition, to talk to her about what a great time she had and whether it was just a bad night, you know? Now, this definition has survived repeated attempts to ignore it. It's been incorporated into the elements of crimes of the International Criminal Court and is expanding its reach. The development of the whole concept gender crime on the international stage, where it is now accepted at the International Criminal Court, is another large illustration. As I alluded to, substantive equality doctrine is another great example in the constitutional law of Canada. It illustrates chaos theory's notion of the specific tolerance that is built into a nonlinear process that promotes course correction. One scholar of chaos theory put this in this really pithy and great way. He said, simply put, a linear process, given a slight nudge, tends to remain slightly off track. A nonlinear process, given the same nudge, tends to return to its starting point. It's sort of the difference between, you know, if you've ever tiled a room, if you start out just a little bit off, it's a linear process, and you're going to tile yourself into a corner more and more and more as it goes on. It's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. See also U.S. equality law. Remaining slightly off track is a charitable description, I think, of it, in fact. Whereas the Supreme Court of Canada originally accepted substantive equality's approach that inequality is hierarchy in historic disadvantage. And it also then applied it to hate propaganda, thus saving a hate propaganda statute on a equality ground from a speech attack. And it applied it to pornography as well, saving it on a sex equality ground from a speech attack. And then the court kind of wandered in the wilderness for a couple of decades, using, this is a very fast critique, but the old formal equality ideas, the abstract sameness-difference notions under the name of substantive equality. To put it really simply for people with a philosophical background, they escaped Aristotle. They escaped the clutches of Aristotle, only to fall into the grip of Kant. Okay. What they did suddenly was say inequality was all about dignity. Well, actually, dignity is part of substantive, indignity is part of substantive inequality, but it's only part of it, and it isn't always a problem, and it really leaves a lot out. The Canadians then proved capable, is my point here, of course correction, returning to the original breakthrough. That is the realization that inequality is about hierarchy, with indignity being just one measure of the status damage of that hierarchy. Engaging legal systems with these linear strategies that don't challenge existing power dynamics, in other words, concedes existing power structures, and so it will reiterate them, proceeding ever more determinately to no equality destination, tiling us into a corner, see also. And by contrast, a nudge that engages a nonlinear process consciously, if it started properly, can get it back to the proper beginning at any point. So the legal theory of social change that emerges from all this is not simply deterministic, as much legal realism would have it, nor is it cynically despairing, as much critical legal theory would lead you to believe. Traditional theories, realism old and new, public choice theory, or even pluralism, for example, tend by contrast to be reductionist, linear, unreflective of social complexity, and certainly not adapted to the substantive realities of male dominance. What this book is attempting to do is to begin to explain how some changes can be ongoing, how they can be ready to erupt, given a spark or a little bit more momentum. We're seeing that in the Me Too movement, which I think is unthinkable if sexual harassment had been outright legal for the last 40 years, as it was for the previous 2,000. It's also the case with, say, the issue of pornography, I think. Even when, as with it, the inequality that it challenges actually has blocked realizing either that it's unequal or that something can be done about it. What this theory does is exposes patterns where none were visible. It can help reveal why certain arguments are persuasive, why certain strategies have worked, why some changes have seemingly come out of nowhere to suddenly be everywhere. Now, another example of that is the Nordic model on prostitution, which is also mentioned in there, and some further steps in the book, and some further steps on it are in process, which penalizes the buyers and the sellers of sex, that is to say, the pimps and traffickers and the Johns being the buyers, the sellers being the pimps and traffickers, and eliminates any penalties for the sold, that is, prostituted people. It was passed in Sweden in 1999 and is moving all over the world at this point. Has been accepted in France, Canada, Northern Ireland, Ireland, as well as Norway and Iceland. The one place where a certain butterfly effect is just beginning, I would say, is the law of rape. I mentioned its definition and the way in which it leaves consent out. The idea here is that making consent central to rape law is what puts the victim on trial. It's why the British conviction rate, with its all-consent rape law, is an appalling 6.3%. I thought the US conviction rates were really bad, 12 to 25% roughly, it was in all these different jurisdictions until I saw that. Consent as a concept is rooted in the active-passive model of sex, substantively, as being something that someone with more power does to someone with less power. It is thoroughly sex stereotyped. It is given its fullest expression in liberal political thought, that which justifies rulers in ruling the ruled. What are the ruled doing when rulers are ruling them according to all this? Consenting. What it really means is acquiescence, whether or not a choice is real. It means being rolled by power. What if Harvey Weinstein is right when he says he had no non-consensual sex? All it means is he rolled everybody with his power the whole time. In other words, it's an intrinsically unequal concept, even when it works the way it's designed to work, even especially when it works the way it's designed to work. The international law of sex trafficking, by distinction, now prohibits sexual exploitation in circumstances of vulnerability or abuse of power. The US has actually ratified this. It's the Palermo Protocol. Consent in it is irrelevant, actually. And in the larger law of sex trafficking, most of which the US hasn't ratified, That has been the case since at least 1949. So I'm just suggesting, I mean, there's a reason that sexual harassment law has never used the concept of consent. It uses the concept of unwelcomeness, which is entirely different. Inequality, the reason is it's an equality law. Inequality is not consented to. If you accept unequal pay, that doesn't make it equal. Rape is a crime of inequality. Consent needs to come out of rape law. The short version of this talk is in the book. Domestic laws of rape need instead to be based on coercion, reconfiguring definitions of force to extend beyond physical force to all the forms of inequality that make rape possible, specifically including race, class, sexual orientation, disability overwhelmingly, gender identity massively, and age, please, which is in rape law, except it's stuck off over here into a wholly separate thing. So age, meaning little children, we can do something about that while never having the rape law recognize all the realities of the vulnerabilities to rape in one body of law. As well as, of course, gender stereotypes when actively deployed in a challenged interaction. And here the Me Too movement is really starting to get someplace in talking about inequalities and the ways in which they affect what goes on in sexual interactions. So in case you're wondering what's left to do out there, besides prostitution, pornography, and rape, there is the continued virtually total impunity for sexual abuse of children. I think it's the foundational practice of the whole gender system. Sexual abuse in childhood, I think, is ground zero of sex inequality. It's the foundation of prostitution and sex trafficking, in that most people used in prostitution, that is, the destination, the point, the purpose of sex trafficking is prostitution, right? So most people used in prostitution were sexually abused as children and entered prostitution as children. Both children and most prostituted people sustain molestation under circumstances in which they have few, if any, real options. Sexual abuse in childhood, that is, sex being forced on someone with less power by someone with more, is precisely what rape and sexual harassment and prostitution are all about. And it's actually that same dynamic that pornography sexualizes. And many, actually, too, if not most, not all, so far as we know, but many, rapists were sexually abused as children. To escape this being done to them, which is a choice that they are given if they are men, many men become masculine, sexualizing power over others. And to survive under such a system, girls are taught to acquiesce in femininity, that is, sexualizing power over us, which beats feeling forced, you know? So sexual abuse in childhood explains more about the gender system, that is, more about male violence, meaning violence, actually, and more about sexual politics, meaning politics, than any other single thing does. If you put all these studies together, it affects about half of girls in the United States in contact forms before they reach the age of majority, and at least a quarter of boys, and it's my sense that that is a low number. And although some valiant steps have been made against some institutions, religious institutions, residential schools being on the top of that list, almost nothing is being done about it, despite there being all kinds of laws against it. You know, Blackstone, a long time ago, said, better 10 perpetrators go free than one innocent suffer. He said that as if these were alternatives. Now, with sexual assault, we have both. We have 10 perpetrators going free. We have one person who didn't do it suffering by being convicted for reasons of their powerlessness on other grounds, usually. But given the real numbers, his percentage of the free perpetrators were really, really low. So, as all this illustrates, this is not an individual dynamic. If a tornado eventuates, it's collective. Each initiative, all these initiatives, every one I've mentioned, began with survivors' lives, called narrative, I guess, in scholarship, facts, testimony in cases, about which essentially nothing was being done, that latter called impunity. Followed by the first perturbations predicated on a relationship between the survivor, organizers, and advocates who were awake. Unsettling waters in what appeared to be, every single time, off in Sweden, someplace in Banff, in dreaded Minneapolis. I mean, just any, local place. The original proposal of the Human Rights Ordinance against pornography, in which is a good example in which each single cause of action for specific injuries that have to be proven has a particular victim's face on it to those of us who created it. The point here is, if survivors trust you, there is nothing you can't accomplish. I didn't used to think of substance as the key to process. Now I do. The main lesson I've learned from practice on the ground is how to produce social change for women through legal activism is that the who and the what are absolutely crucial to the how. The content, the specific content of each situation, who she is, making her matter, its location in the structure of the whole situation is the key to strategy. In trying to move the plate tectonics of the world, it tells you where and how to insert the lever. What's big and what's small? What doesn't matter? What really does matter? What is cause? What is effect? What is the context? In other words, the substance of the political analysis of the reality is what makes the legal strategy effective when it's effective. So, what does law mean to women? It means, I've learned, community. That is, your people stand behind you. They hear you. They support you. It also means reality. What you say happened, happened. No more gaslighting. Your knowledge is valid. It means vindication, that it's wrong that you were wronged. You knew that, but it says back to you that. Someone took something that belongs to you. You count. It also means hope. That is, what happened to you might not happen to someone else like you, or even maybe to you again. Now, the law is invested with this kind of meaning. Not that it provides closure, because it really can't. Not that it can order incarceration, although sometimes it's necessary, because incarceration does so little right and so much wrong. Not that it provides money damages, because even when they're deserved, no amount fully compensates from what they took from you. It can't bring back a murdered child. It can't unrape a woman or a girl or a man or a boy. Law's power to change lies in its capacity to give you back a piece of the humanity that your victimizer took away from you. This possible chunk of wholeness, hope for it. This power that is given to law is what lawyers for violated people, whether they are rightfully vindicated in courts or wrongfully convicted, this is what we hold in our hands. So, all but alone, in isolation, in image, butterflies are delicate. even fragile. They can be overlooked or reduced to decoration, put in boxes. In life, their endurance lies in their collectivity and their power in their collective effect. On its life journey, a butterfly can be collected and categorized. Many of them die, most of them, for lack of nutrition, or they're smashed against windshields. But still we rise everywhere. So I say, equality seekers, spread your wings. You're stronger than you know. And what butterflies can set in motion, sometimes even just one, cannot be stopped. Thank you. So let's have thoughts, interjections, challenges, looking to hear them all.
Please raise your hand. We have 2 microphones circulating through the room.
In the center of the back there?
So I was just wondering where we place women's agency in this entire scheme of coercion. So is it that individual women are not capable of exercising any agency? Because then the assumption is that it's all happening in a culture of dominance and coercion.
Yeah, the term agency was introduced into this discussion by people defending the pornography industry. That was where it was created. As you know, who've studied law, what agency actually means is someone who is the puppet of the principal. That's the agent, yeah? So this, popularized use of it has flipped the notion into being something that is a slippery academic excuse for never saying what you mean, quite honestly. I'm just giving you some history and background of the term. If one means freely acting, powerful, feistily fighting off fascist stereotypes, whatever it's supposed to mean in evoke isn't said. You're just supposed to kind of know, right? The other aspect to it is that we're never told, and no one has ever taken me up on this, so maybe you all will, how it is one can be free under conditions of inequality. Something that simple. Libraries of books on freedom. Men love freedom and love to think about it and talk about it and go on about it, and thus endless books about it. But how you can have what is in fact the documented reality of social hierarchy on the grounds that I've mentioned, and yet one is freely acting within it. You can do a free will determinism regress all you like and get nowhere within that in any number of theories out there, but the idea that people are having sex under conditions of inequality seems to be a shock. And to challenge people's notions of how they might not be free in any other place, but this is a place in which they are. And yet, there isn't a theory out there that has actually argued that, how that is, why that is, and how it can be the case. Okay? Although I will say that, people who believe in that sexuality is a natural sphere, fundamentally, do at least have a theory of that, and want to attribute various natural capacities to it that then they will suggest are not being overwhelmed by social inequality. The rape rates, unreported rape, rates of sexual harassment that include it, but et cetera, don't help support that theory very well. So my particular thought about women's agency, as you put it, is actually every butterfly I've talked about is a dramatic example of women asserting power against inequality as it's being imposed. And we're actually getting somewhere. There's a dramatic amount of women's empowerment talked about every minute that I've been standing up here. When we oppose a social structural situation of coercion and call that out as specifically embedded in the rape law that I'm proposing. Actually, I wrote about this question in the Harvard Journal of Law and Policy, is that right? Or is it, yeah, I think that's right. There's two of them, and they both say Harvard and Policy and Law in them. Anyway, it's 2016, and it's called Rape Redefined, and it has a statute at the end of it. The notion there is to go after the aggressive imposition of sex stereotypes under those conditions, that is through sexual aggression. And, you know, if anybody who's, I mean, many people have sexual relationships that are not completely controlled by the imposition of sexual aggression on them. That thus is not a problem. Those people are in general not going to prosecutors. They are not in general calling the police. They are not in general trying to figure out if Title IX is going to do anything for them. Those are the people to whom this is addressed, and the people who don't have this problem don't have it. People who don't have a problem don't mean that the people who do have it do not, is what I mean simply to say. Also, people who don't experience this as a problem of theirs are entitled to that experience. They don't need me. At least not yet, maybe I should say. Go ahead, any other comments, questions? There've got to be more. Yes.
Thank you for being here. And my question's about FOSTA.
Thank you for being here. Yeah.
You're welcome. So my question is about FOSTA and SESTA. I'm happy to leave it there, but I guess I'm also trying to structure it within the framework of the butterfly effect. And how one weighs maybe the absolute positive nature of a law with kind of the acute, immediate realities of a law, if that makes sense.
Yeah, why don't you explain to people what it does quickly and
Well, my understanding is it penalizes online marketplaces for you have a better understanding of the law. But my best understanding of it is that
it used to be that internet service providers were exempt
exactly
from online prostitution and sex trafficking ads, which they were running and making millions and millions of dollars on. And that exemption has gone on for the longest time. Craigslist was doing it endlessly until we made Craig feel really bad on television, and then he stopped doing it. Backpage picked up on it, the Village Voice did. I mean, those are just a couple of prominent ones, but there's all these sites out there that are trafficking in women and children in, by the way, in indistinguishable forms. You know, the age line is such that, in my opinion, and this is a longer argument, you will never do anything about children, younger women, until we do something for adult women. Because any minute, a man can look at a girl and want her as women are supposed to be wanted by him. She is seen as being an adult, whatever age she is, even if she's acting like a child, set up like a child, put in massive furniture, you know, with little bows and, you know, tiny skirts and toys and, you know, captioned "waiting for daddy." You know, so that targets children, yet underneath it's, you know, it says that she is over the age of 18. So anyhow, what FOSTA SESTA did was remove that exemption and say internet service providers are too responsible for trafficking, sex trafficking, when they are selling people for sex online.
And right, and I can definitely see the absolute positivity of that in the long sense, but the acute reality is also on the flip side of that has driven what is already a pretty submerged community or subjugated community deeper underground, and often back into the hands.
Right, and that
who are
community is
sole
first of all
proprietors.
being subjugated by the pimps who are selling them and the Johns who are buying them. And, you know, yet more, the reason the Nordic model is the answer to your question is that it includes as well as an element of prosecuting buyers as human rights violators, and pimps and traffickers also. It includes real material support for people who are, as you say, a member of this quote-unquote underground community. And the French law really is the best on this. It was passed by the Hollande regime, not the current one. The socialist France, actually. So the understanding of all the material needs that people, I mean, the reason people are in prostitution is overwhelming that they are poor. Everybody knows this, everybody says this, including the people who defend it. And so if poverty is apparently, some people think it's what, an aphrodisiac or something. Other people think it's a form of coercion. That if you're having sex because you otherwise won't survive, that's called survival sex. And some of us think that that means you're being forced to have it by the need to survive, okay? And so what the French law version of the Nordic model does is provides education, training, housing, childcare, I mean, the whole range of material needs that anyone who wants to leave prostitution, which over 90%, by the way, say they do worldwide, places where it's legal, not places, you know, all street, house, everything. They all want to leave, but they don't know how. And whatever the 9 or 10 or less percent who don't offer that spontaneously in answer to the question, what do you most need, are, you know, we can talk about that percentage, but still, this 90% is entitled to some options in life. And those of us who work with them, including in India, in South Africa, et cetera, know that they're there because of lack of options. You preclude 99% of women's options and then call it her choice when she's found doing this thing, and then say, wow, we make this harder, we make a submerged community's situation even more difficult. You're sort of missing the prior several steps here, and also the actual material address that is necessary for it. And, you know, this country should be doing more to provide real options for those women. And sex equality is one real approach that could make a big difference. It's just to put it super briefly.
Hi. Sorry. Hello, Professor MacKinnon. Thank you for your talk. It was amazing. I have a question from the standpoint of someone who has been researching the issue of equality for...
Researching?
Yes, equality in Brazil and in comparative law for the past years. And from my standpoint, it looks like from the 60s until today, there has been several setbacks in the movements towards equality, like sex equality and race equality and social equality. But overall, like the arc of the moral universe has been bending towards justice. but I'm not sure if that, yeah, maybe, perhaps.
Right.
But I mean, a great amount of accomplishments have been made in the US and in other countries. My question is, did something happen in 2016 that may be changing this? I mean, the election of Trump, the fact that fascist movements have been going on. I mean, where do we go from here? Do we have a good? What are we facing here? What's your perspective on where equality can go?
Well, you know, while those of us who do this work care about elections, do conventional politics, are engaged in all these fights, including worked for FOSTA and SESTA and all that, as well as the anti-trafficking laws and so on, internationally and domestically. The actual focus of our work is on an entirely different level. It's on the level of sexual politics, that is, the politics of relations between women and men, which are definitely affected by all that, but it's social, cultural, economic on that level. And on that level, there has been and sexual, there has been some amount of change, you're right. On the legal level, the level that you can most find, there has been some advance, some regression, some advance, some regression, some fair amount of advance. What I think we're looking at right now is, for instance, in 2016, we did have the election of a perpetrator-in-chief, but we also have women deciding enough is enough here and responding to it. And I think in many ways, the Me Too movement would not have happened if he hadn't been elected. That it created a context in which opposition to sexual harassment was linked no longer with the politics of Bill Clinton, who was loved and respected, but rather, and somewhat on the left, but rather with opposition to someone who is quite widely hated, reviled, and found to be disgusting. And on the right, sort of. I mean, he's not a real conservative. Everyone knows that. But so it shifted the politics of opposition to sexual harassment in a way that freed up a lot of momentum and energy, I think. And you could see speaking out against sexual harassment as part of your opposition to the illegitimacy, as it's understood, of this administration. So there's a different set of link-ups. And I think, and it's obvious that that's been highly energizing to women in seeking equality for sexual abuse. So there's real democratic dynamism going on in this. And real issues are being gotten to, and real brilliance is being shown through digital access all over social media, where people are talking in inspired and fabulous ways, really, about their experiences and what they think they mean. And people are talking about art differently. They're talking about the business issues. They're talking about it in tech and what it means there. They're talking about it in politics, definitely. We're back to the question, does it matter who he is, as well as what he's done? And is this part of who he is? All these questions are being re-raised in a pointed and effective way. So I would just say the dynamic you noticed is correct, but that there's also, on this deeper level, been plenty of butterflies who are taking flight at this point.